Welcome, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Let's dive into today's story. As I sat there swirling the remnants of my whiskey in the glass, the absurdity of the moment struck me again like a slap. How could a simple evening turn into this? My wife and her best friend had dropped a bombshell that felt both surreal and oddly premeditated. My wife, Grace, and I have been married for 7 years now. Our marriage, while rooted in the same vows and love as any traditional union, has always been a little unconventional. From the very beginning, we were drawn to each other because of our shared sense of adventure, openness, and a commitment to building a life that didn't necessarily fit the mold. Central to this life was Laura, Grace's best friend. From the outset, Laura wasn't just a passing figure in our relationship. She was a fixture. Over the years, her presence grew from being Grace's confidant to becoming a cornerstone of our family dynamic. When our first child was born, Laura was there, pacing the hospital waiting room with a bag of snacks for Grace and endless nervous energy. From the moment she held our baby girl, it was clear she'd play an important role in our children's lives. She's been like a second mom since day one, always showing up with thoughtful gifts, endless patience, and a knack for calming tantrums in a way that amazed even us. Birthdays, holidays, school milestones, Laura has been present for all of them. She knows our kids' favorite bedtime stories, has a special recipe for pancakes that they adore, and is their go-to partner for hide-and-seek marathons in the backyard. Even on the most chaotic days, when Grace and I are stretched thin between work and parenting, Laura steps in without hesitation. Laura is, by all accounts, an impressive woman. She's built a successful career in marketing, with a reputation for creative campaigns that leave competitors in awe. Independent and fiercely ambitious, she's carved out a life for herself that many would envy. Despite her success, she's never been interested in settling down romantically. Relationships, to her, seemed like a complication she didn't need until recently. It was supposed to be an ordinary night, a comforting end to a long day. The kids had gone to bed, leaving behind their usual trail of stuffed animals and half-finished art projects. Laura, my wife Grace's best friend, was perched comfortably on the couch as she had been countless times before. She had become almost a fixture in our lives, trusted, reliable, and deeply intertwined in our family's journey. But now, I was starting to question everything I thought I knew about the dynamics in this house. The air was warm with laughter and the subtle haze of wine-induced relaxation. Laura was halfway through a story about a colleague's disastrously miscalculated pie chart when Grace dropped her verbal grenade. "What if my husband was your donor?" Grace asked, her voice sweet and calm, like she was suggesting what to order for dinner. My reaction was immediate and visceral. I choked, the whiskey burning as it went down the wrong way. Beside me, Laura's laugh faltered, transforming into a nervous giggle that trailed off awkwardly. "Grace!" I managed to sputter after a coughing fit, my voice hoarse with a mix of shock and disbelief. Grace looked at me with a mixture of amusement and seriousness, her lips curling into a sly smile. "What?" she asked, as if I were the one being ridiculous. "You've seen what amazing kids you make. It's logical, isn't it?" My gaze darted to Laura, expecting her to laugh and dismiss the comment as one of Grace's eccentric jokes. But Laura didn't. She squirmed slightly, her hands gripping the hem of her sweater, her face a mixture of discomfort and something else I couldn't quite place. Was it an agreement? Laura began hesitantly, her voice soft. "We have talked about it." Time seemed to stop. Her words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "You've what?" Grace shrugged as though this were an everyday conversation topic. Laura's been thinking about starting a family, but the idea of going through a sperm bank made her uneasy. Then it hit me. Why bother with an anonymous donor when she could have someone she trusts? Someone who's already proven to be a great dad. Laura glanced at Grace, then at me, her cheeks flushed. It makes sense, she murmured, her voice barely audible. I know you. I trust you. And it wouldn't feel like a stranger was involved. I turned to Grace, hoping for some clarity, but her next words only deepened the confusion. In fact, Grace said calmly, there's no need for a donor at all. You could just have sex with her and make her pregnant. Why involve a doctor when you can make the process completely natural? My jaw dropped. What? Did she just suggest I sleep with her best friend? This was spiraling into the kind of plot twist you'd expect in a bad soap opera. I stared at Grace, waiting for her to burst into laughter and reveal this was all some elaborate joke. But her expression remained steady, almost businesslike, as if she were merely discussing the weather or grocery shopping. Laura, on the other hand, looked as though she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. She kept her eyes fixed on her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap, her fingers twisting nervously. The faint smile on her lips lingered, betraying her conflicted emotions. This is insane, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. You're actually suggesting, no, encouraging, me to cheat on my wife? Not cheat, Grace corrected calmly, as though that word was somehow too crass or inaccurate for what she was proposing. This isn't about infidelity. This is about practicality. A child is the goal here, and this is the simplest, most natural way to achieve it. I blinked at her, struggling to find words for the sheer audacity of her logic. My thoughts raced as I tried to process what she was saying. Was this some sort of test? Was Grace genuinely serious? Or was she trying to see how far I would go? And why wasn't Laura outright rejecting this absurd suggestion? Why was she smiling? This is crazy, I said louder this time, hoping to snap both of them out of whatever delusion they seemed to be trapped in. Have you both really thought this through? Do you even realize how complicated this would make things? Forget the logistics. What about the emotions, the aftermath? Grace shrugged, her expression unflinching. Of course, we've thought about it. Laura needs this, and you're in a position to help her. Why complicate something that can be simple? Besides, it's not like you'd be doing it behind my back. I'm the one suggesting it. I turned to Laura, my voice softening. And you're okay with this? With me? Her blush deepened, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. But then, she nodded, barely, but enough to confirm what I feared. I don't know what else to do, she murmured. I want a baby. And if Grace is okay with this. Her voice trailed off, leaving the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions coursing through me. Shock, disbelief, guilt, and a faint, unwelcome flicker of curiosity. I don't even know where to start, I muttered, shaking my head. This isn't just a decision you can make overnight. It's not that simple. Grace leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine with a strange mix of determination and reassurance. No, it's not simple, but it's doable. And if you think about it, it's a solution that works for everyone. Everyone? I thought bitterly. Not me. This wasn't a solution. It was a recipe for disaster. But as I looked between Grace's calm, confident face and Laura's vulnerable, pleading one, I realized this wasn't just about logic. It was about the tangled mess of relationships and desires that were now threatening to pull us all under. The next morning, as I sat at the kitchen table nursing a cup of coffee and trying to piece together the surreal events of the previous night, Grace waltzed in, her demeanor as casual as if she were about to comment on the weather. Laura followed behind her, looking like she hadn't slept a wink, her eyes darting nervously between me and Grace. Good morning, Grace said brightly, grabbing a mug from the counter and pouring herself some coffee. I muttered a reply, not trusting myself to speak more than a word or two. She took a sip of her coffee and sat across from me, her expression strangely relaxed. "So, I've been thinking," she began, her tone conversational, as though we were discussing plans for a weekend getaway. "Maybe we're overcomplicating things. What if we just all did this together?" I blinked, certain I had misheard her. "All did what together?" I asked cautiously, though I already had a sinking feeling I knew exactly what she meant. Grace smiled, her eyes sparkling with a mischievous edge. "You know, a threesome. It would solve everything, wouldn't it? No one feels left out. No one has to pretend it's anything other than what it is, and it might even be fun." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, leaving me utterly speechless. I looked at her, trying to gauge if she was joking, but her expression remained maddeningly earnest. "Grace," I said slowly, setting my coffee cup down, "you can't be serious. A threesome? With my wife and her best friend? This isn't some ridiculous fantasy. This is real life." "Exactly," she said, leaning forward. "And in real life, sometimes you have to think outside the box. Laura wants a baby. You can give her one. But why not make the experience enjoyable for all of us? No awkwardness, no guilt, no secrets. Just honesty and practicality." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This isn't about what I'm willing to do. It's about what makes sense, what's right. And this isn't it. Grace sighed, as though I were being the unreasonable one. "Look, I get it. It's unconventional. But unconventional doesn't mean wrong. We're all adults here. We can handle this." "Handle this?" I repeated, incredulous. "Grace, this isn't something you just handle. This is the kind of thing that ruins relationships, ruins lives." But as I spoke, I could see the determination in her eyes and the hesitant curiosity in Laura's. They were serious, both of them, and for the first time, I realized just how far down the rabbit hole we had fallen. Later that day, I found myself driving to meet my closest friend, Daniel. He'd been my sounding board for years, someone I could count on to tell me the truth, even when it was hard to hear. If anyone could help me make sense of this mess, it was him. We met at our usual spot, a quiet bar tucked away in the corner of town. Daniel was already there when I arrived, nursing a beer and scrolling through his phone. He looked up as I slid into the booth across from him, immediately sensing something was wrong. "You look like hell," he said, setting his phone down. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, then launched into the story. I told him everything, Grace's suggestion, Laura's reaction, and how completely out of my depth I felt. As I spoke, Daniel's expression shifted from amusement to disbelief to something resembling concern. When I finished, he leaned back in his seat, rubbing a hand over his face. "Wow," he said finally, "that's a lot. I mean, Grace has always been a little unconventional, but this is next level." "No kidding," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "So, what do I do? How do I even begin to handle this?" Daniel took a long sip of his beer, then set the glass down with a decisive thud. "First of all, you need to make it clear to Grace that this isn't happening. No matter how she tries to spin it, this whole situation is a disaster waiting to happen. You've got to set boundaries, man. Non-negotiable ones." "I tried," I said. "She just keeps coming back with these arguments, like she's trying to rationalize the whole thing. And Laura, she's not exactly fighting it either." Daniel frowned. "Yeah, I get that. But here's the thing. This isn't just about them. It's about you too. And you've got every right to say no. Don't let them guilt you into something you're not comfortable with." I nodded slowly, his words sinking in. "But what if I'm overreacting? Grace keeps saying it's not a big deal, that we can handle it. What if she's right?" Daniel shook his head. "She's not right. Look, I'm not saying I know your relationship better than you do, but this isn't healthy. It's one thing to talk about options, but what Grace is suggesting goes way beyond that. It's not just unconventional, it's reckless. He leaned forward, his expression serious. You need to have a real conversation with her. Not about the threesome or the baby or any of that, about your marriage. Because if she's willing to risk everything for something like this, there's a bigger issue at play. I stared at the table, his words hitting me harder than I expected. He was right. This wasn't just about Grace's suggestion or Laura's hesitation. It was about the cracks in my marriage that I hadn't even realized were there. And what if she doesn't back down? I asked quietly. What if she keeps pushing for this? Daniel sighed, his gaze steady. Then you need to ask yourself if this is the kind of relationship you want to be in. Because a marriage is supposed to be a partnership, not a one-sided negotiation. If Grace can't respect your boundaries, then maybe it's time to reconsider what you're fighting for. The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy blanket. It wasn't the answer I wanted to hear, but deep down I knew he was right. I needed to take a stand, not just for myself, but for the future of my marriage. We spent the rest of the evening talking, Daniel offering advice and support as I tried to wrap my head around everything. By the time I left, I felt a little more grounded, a little more ready to face whatever came next. As I drove home, one thought kept circling in my mind. It was time to have that conversation with Grace, no matter how difficult it might be. Because if we couldn't come to an understanding, then Daniel was right. Our marriage might already be broken beyond repair. That night, after pacing the house for what felt like hours, I finally worked up the courage to confront Grace. She was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book, looking for all the world like nothing had happened. But my stomach churned as I sat down across from her, my heart pounding in my chest. Grace, I began, my voice steady but firm. We need to talk about this whole situation. She closed her book and set it aside, her expression calm but curious. I figured you'd want to, she said. So, what's on your mind? I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. First of all, I need to make something absolutely clear. I love you, and I'm committed to this marriage. But what you've been suggesting, this thing with Laura, it's not something I'm comfortable with. At all. She didn't interrupt, so I continued. If Laura really wants a baby, and you think it's important that I help her, then the only thing I'm willing to do is be a donor. That's it. I cannot and will not go through with what you're suggesting about doing it. Naturally. It's not just about boundaries, Grace. It's about respect for you, for Laura, and for myself. Grace leaned back, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she was going to argue, but instead, she nodded slowly. Okay, she said quietly. If that's what you want, then that's what we'll do. I won't push you on it anymore. I felt a wave of relief, but it was quickly replaced by lingering frustration. Why did you even suggest it in the first place? I asked. Do you realize how insane it sounded? You're my wife, and you were talking about me sleeping with your best friend like it was no big deal. She looked away, her cheeks flushing slightly. I don't know, she admitted. I guess. I just wanted to try something different. To shake things up, maybe. I know it sounds crazy, but I thought it could be exciting, something new for us. New. I repeated, incredulous. Grace, that's not new. That's crossing a line. A big one. I know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to hurt you or ruin what we have. She paused, searching for the right words. I guess I got caught up in this idea of pushing boundaries, of being, more adventurous. But I see now that I went too far. And I'm really, truly sorry. Her sincerity softened some of my anger, but I wasn't ready to let it go completely. You have to understand, Grace, this isn't something you could just throw out there and expect me to be okay with. There are consequences to suggestions like that. It made me question everything about us, about our marriage. She reached out and took my hand, her grip firm but gentle. I understand, she said. And I don't want you to feel that way. I'll drop it, I promise. No more talk about Laura or anything like this. You're right, it was out of line. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Thank you, I said, my voice softer now. I just want us to focus on us, on what we have. Because it's enough, Grace. It always has been. She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You're right. It is enough. And I'm sorry if I made you feel like it wasn't. Over the next few days, the tension that had hung over the house like a storm cloud began to dissipate. Grace kept her promise not to push the issue any further, and we started to focus on rebuilding the trust and connection between us. She became more open about her feelings, sharing that she'd felt restless lately, not because she was unhappy with me, but because she was searching for something to make her life feel more meaningful. I listened, really listened, and we talked about how we could grow together as a couple without venturing into dangerous territory. It felt like we were reconnecting in a way we hadn't in years, rediscovering the reasons we fell in love in the first place. When we sat down with Laura to discuss the situation, I was prepared for some awkwardness. But to my relief, Laura was understanding. I get it, she said, her cheeks tinged with embarrassment. It was a wild suggestion, and I shouldn't have gone along with it. I just got swept up in Grace's enthusiasm. But the truth is, I respect your boundaries. If you're willing to be a donor, that's more than enough for me. We agreed on a plan to visit a fertility clinic where I could donate, and everything would proceed medically and professionally. Laura was genuinely grateful, and the tension between us eased. There was no lingering awkwardness, just a shared understanding that we were all doing our best to navigate a complicated situation with care and respect. With that chapter behind us, Grace and I threw ourselves into strengthening our relationship. We started going on regular date nights again, something we hadn't done in ages. We spent more time talking, laughing, and dreaming about the future. Grace even suggested a weekend getaway to rekindle the spark between us, and it was exactly what we needed. Laura, too, seemed lighter. She went through with the donor process and, months later, shared the exciting news that she was expecting. Seeing her happiness made me feel like we'd all come out of this stronger and closer than ever. As I sat beside Grace one evening, watching the sunset from our backyard, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. We'd been through a whirlwind, but instead of breaking us, it had brought us closer together. Grace turned to me and smiled. You know, she said, I'm glad we went through all of this. It reminded me of how strong we are, how much we mean to each other. I never want to take that for granted again. Me neither, I said, taking her hand in mine. Whatever comes our way, we'll face it together. And we did. Our marriage wasn't perfect, no relationship is, but it was real, and it was built on love, trust, and a commitment to grow together. As we moved forward, I knew we were ready for whatever the future held. Together. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. What would you have done in this situation? And don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable stories that will keep you coming back for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.